Alright, you guys, this your next Q&A. And like I always say, if I didn't get you on this one, I'll get you on the next one. If you guys got any more questions, put them in any of the comment sections and we'll find them and get them in on the next go around. So let's get straight to it. Galactic Goo wants to know, Boxer, do you know about any situation where someone suspected an intimate removal upon them and ended up fighting back successfully with a piece of their own? As a matter of fact, I do. In Susanville, an incident kicked off between two ends. It was personal. It should have been avoided, and it never should have been allowed to happen. Sometime around 1991, a homeboy of mine named Joe Curligan landed on the 3-yard with us and was celled up with a cat from San Jose named Joel Lopez. Joe is in the photo above. He's in the middle, standing, shaking hands with Federico Arevalo, the guy with the white wife beater on. Joe was from my neighborhood. We had an extensive amount of history on the streets together, and for a minute, he was one of my crime partners. When Joe got to the yard, he was housed in the 1 building, and I was housed all the way on the other side of the yard in the 5 building. As soon as I heard he got there, I was already making arrangements to get him moved to my building. I knew that from running with Joe on the streets, that he was an aggressive dude, and that he was someone that I was probably going to have to keep an eye on. He was just a northerner, but he was a solid individual who would have assisted us however we would have needed him to. The other thing I knew about Joe was that he had a history of bumping heads with some of the youngsters who were in leadership positions. He was an older guy, and like a lot of the older guys, if there's a youngster who tries to press him too hard, he just didn't like the idea of some 20-year-old kid trying to dictate his program. As I anticipated, it didn't take long for Joe to start having problems with his cellie. I don't remember what the issue was about, but all I remember is that Joel came out to the yard and was claiming that he felt like Joe was posing an immediate threat to him. The thing that put Joe at a disadvantage was that Joel was a newly recruited NR member, and he was obviously scared of Joe. At the time, I was also an NR member, but I wasn't playing any favoritism here either way. Joe was the homie from my neighborhood, but Joel was hermano, so I couldn't show any favors. Things had apparently got so bad that later I heard that Joel didn't even want to go back to the cell because Joe had threatened him. The day of the incident, I went to Joe's building and sat him down in an effort to diffuse the issues between him and Joel. I told him he couldn't be pushing up on the homie like that and that he was basically putting me in an awkward position. Even though Joe was a loose cannon, he listened to me and afforded me that respect. After I talked to him, I also talked to Joel, and when I left, I felt pretty confident that it was a dead issue and that we had reached a solution that avoided this from escalating. My plan was just to move Joe in with me and separate those two as soon as I could. I was hoping that the cell move would have went down by the time I got off work later that same day, but it just didn't happen like that. At the time, I was working in the kitchen as a cook, so later that day, I went to work. While I was at work, things ended up escalating, and it got to the point to where some of the other hermanos gave Joel a weapon and told him to hit Joe if he felt threatened. Needless to say, this upset me because I felt like these brothers could have done more to diffuse this conflict opposed to just taking sides. Joel was from San Jose, and the hermanos that gave him the weapon were also from San Jose. I had even told these cats that I personally hit Joe myself if he posed a threat and if he didn't stand down and comply. At yard recall, Joel attempted to hit Joe inside 1 building sally port, but Joe was expecting it and basically destroyed him. Joe tried to blindside him and pull a snake move when the gate opened, but Joe wrestled the pedazo out of his hand, overpowered him, and used his own weapon against him. At the time, there wasn't nothing I could do to stop it because I was locked in the kitchen, but I felt like the other hermanos out there didn't do shit to de-escalate the issue, and this caused future dissension on the yard. Needless to say, this ended Joe's career as he spilled the blood of a hermano, and I couldn't do nothing to help him. It was what it was, but I know that Joe could have hurt Joel a lot worse than he did, and that the only reason he didn't was out of respect for me and because of Joel's status. So Left Inland wants to know, your answer about a crimey taking a guilty plea incriminating his co-defendant was spot on. To elaborate on the question, could court transcripts serve as paperwork in this regard? Have you ever seen a person wrecked for taking a plea bargain behind their crimey's back? Absolutely. It happens all the time. Like I was saying in my last response, this happens a lot, and it's an effective tactic that the DAs use to drive a wedge between co-defendants. As far as the second part of your question, as to whether or not court transcripts can be used as paperwork in this regard, court transcripts is your paperwork. This is the most integral part of your paperwork, especially when you're trying to illustrate how a co-defendant's guilty plea was used adversely against you, or when some type of sentencing stipulation violated protocol. When I say protocol, I mean this. There's certain things that you just can't do when you have a co-defendant. You two are basically tied at the hip and move together. The right hand always has to know what the left hand is doing, period. This is a good question because in all actuality, it's an area that's seldomly talked about. I've seen a lot of homeboys get crossed up behind moves that their attorneys made in court in order to get them the best deal possible. You can't allow the attorneys to play cutthroat amongst each other and give them the latitude to just get you the best deal possible at any expense or at anyone's expense. Your attorney is an extension of you. Therefore, whatever he does, whatever rat hole he goes down, or whatever he says is your responsibility. This is why it's important to know what his strategy is, to know how it could affect your co-defendant, etc., etc. It's on you to ask those questions, and if he tells you, don't worry about your co-defendant, worry about yourself. I'm trying to get you the best deal I can. It's your responsibility to sit him down and explain that it can't play out like that. That you're going to be held accountable for everything he does. He works for you, period. And the fellas ain't going to accept ignorance or a lack of knowledge about what your attorney was doing behind the scenes as a viable excuse. Paperwork comes in all kinds of different forms. You have police reports that basically show what someone got arrested for and whether or not they made statements. Then there's other things like affidavits or other documents that illustrate statements that might have been made long after their initial arrest. And then, of course, you have transcripts that illustrate who testified against you, the sentencing guidelines you agreed to, and the details of how you and your co-defendants are tied in together. The fellas will accept your transcripts as proof positive or as golden proof in situations like this. This is exactly what you would use to show how a co-defendant backdoored you or how his admission of guilt had an adverse effect on you. So Alex True wants to know, did the NF ever order an elimination of a Sureño hood in Northern Cal? I'm sure a city like San Jose, SF, Hayward could take out their southern rivals if all those sets there work together. Yes, this has happened all over Northern California, and it shouldn't come as any real surprise. It would be the same way in Southern California if Norteños migrated out there and started setting up shop. They might hold their ground and survive for a while, but eventually they're going to get overwhelmed and ran out of those strongholds. The same thing has happened all over Northern California. Whether they were upstate Sureños who were homegrown in Northern California, or whether they were righteous Sureños who migrated out there to take advantage of the financial opportunities in Northern California. In certain situations, when these strongholds became too big and where they began to impede and interfere on our ability to make money, they were flushed out and continuously targeted until they were completely gone. I've seen or heard it happen in San Francisco, Oakland, Hayward, and a lot of other smaller Bay Area cities. Then I've heard it happen in Santa Rosa, Sacramento, Modesto, Salinas, San Jose, Stockton, all up and down the valley towards Visalia, Tulare County, Fresno, and just about every other big or small county in between. Let's keep it real though. Whether they migrated or were upstate Sureños, they infiltrated and set up shop with relative ease. This happened all over Northern California, and a big part of why they were able to do it without much resistance is because the NF was focused more on making money, and it had the majority of its following, the NR, focused on this endeavor as well. By the time we looked around and realized what was happening, it was too late. They had pretty much overwhelmed a lot of the smaller and bigger cities. I've seen the pushback initiated in some of these Northern California cities from some of the Norteño street gangs themselves, just as a result of gangbanging and from vying for territory out there. Nobody had to go in with directives and tell these Norteño hoods nothing. They picked up arms themselves and initiated the cleansing due to them growing tired of the street gang warfare that was playing out all over. However, it happened again in the late 90s when Cuete implemented El Norte law and made it a mandatory requirement for every Norteño hood to participate. Those hoods that didn't actively participate were targeted and hit by the NF themselves. The awakening happened almost instantaneous. Cuete sent out the mandates that basically conveyed his message. Due to our own indiscretions and our obvious lack of seeing what has been playing out in our own backyard, we have allowed the opposition to infiltrate most, if not all, of our Northern California cities. How it happened wasn't a focal point of the mandate. The bottom line was, we're here. We got here, so now it's all our responsibility to take up arms to cease the red-on-red conflict and to begin a full-court press against the opposition. That was the crux of it. He didn't explain that we got there because the NF single-handedly focused all its attention on generating money through the street regiments, and in doing so, basically abandoned one of the fundamental rudimentary principles of the cause: to protect the Norteño following both behind the walls and on the streets. This is when I seen whole neighborhoods flushed out, big and small, because it was initiated systematically on a level that has never been done before. So Mr. Johnny on the spot wants to know, whatever happened to Lucky Mendoza after being removed in San Quentin? Did he lay down or did he get his get backs? Based on the accusation solely on Skip's word shouldn't be enough. Wouldn't or shouldn't he be cleared through the General Advocate's office after a proper investigation? Good point, man. After George Lucky Mendoza got hit, that was basically the end of his career. You're absolutely right though, brother. Per NF law, he probably could have been cleared by the GAO, but I believe he was so discouraged by what had happened that he had no desire to return to the fold. I mean, think about it. It was widely known that this was over a female and that it was more about Skip pushing a personal agenda for his boy Ponyboy than it was about punishing Lucky for being with another seized girl. They sliced Lucky up pretty bad too. And when you're subjected to that kind of disloyalty at a stage in your career like Lucky's, when he just took a life sentence, where he's been around long enough to see how cutthroat the organization has become, and where you have to come to terms with the fact that your supposed brothers turned on you, it's easy to get discouraged. Honestly, I don't even think that Lucky even wanted any get-backs. I think he just decided that he had seen enough and that it wasn't in the cards for him anymore. The fact that someone with Skip status was gunning for Lucky was something else that I'm sure deeply discouraged him as well. It's almost like the deck stacked against you. And the way politics are played these days, sometimes it doesn't even matter if you're guilty or not. Guilty of whatever infraction you're being accused of committing. Sometimes it's who you know and what kind of juice you have within the O that makes all the difference. So Machete wants to know, how long have you been doing YouTube? I started listening to you on the other channels before you started Paradigm. And how did you end up with Sandman? I've been on the YouTube scene for close to 5 years now. I've always liked to watch YouTube videos, and that's kind of how it started. I tapped into some of the other prison channels that were out at that time, and I eventually created an account and started dropping comments. I didn't identify who I was back then, but some of the other viewers and some of the channels that began responding to my comments began alluding to the fact that they could tell that I was either someone who was hooked up or who had possibly been hooked up at one time. At the very least, they could tell that I had definitely done time. Some of the things that I was articulating were obviously the people who had a keen eye for that type of lingo, and I guess it just stood out. After a few months of just doing what a lot of you do, watch videos and drop comments, a particular individual with a similar background reached out and asked if I was interested in possibly working with him. Because of the circumstances, I wasn't too crazy about the idea of my face being plastered all over the internet, so it was a gradual process. After meeting up and talking a little more about it, he came to realize that one of my stronger suits was writing. His was producing videos and graphic designs. When he found out that I already had a published book, we decided to do another version of my book that included pictures and voiceovers, similar to an audiobook. So it was at that point that we decided to combine our talents and work together, producing videos and short stories geared at both prison and street gangs. He had already been providing and producing content on YouTube for a good minute, so I jumped on board with him on a small channel he had been running called Loaded News Media. After about 2 years of putting out some good quality content and at one point even dabbling in a podcast, in 2019 I eventually seen the potential in going solo and pursued my own channel. This is when I created Paradigm Media News. I still continue to do projects on Loaded News Media, but once I got some solid footing and teamed up with Sandman and a few others who are part of the Paradigm Media News team, I branched off on my own. As far as how I met Sandman, I believe he responded to a comment I made about looking for someone who knew how to edit and who had experience producing videos. He ended up reaching out and the rest is history. So in short order, Machete, I've been doing this YouTube thing for about 5 years now. So Roberto Lopez wants to know, can you explain the significance of the eagle holding a dagger in its beak while grasping a heart in its talons? I never heard of a heart in the talons. I'm not sure what you're referring to, homie, but I'm assuming you mean the significance of the NF insignia. Let me just say this first. Over the years, I've seen a lot of different NF drawings or tattoos that all represented the NF insignia. Although some of them were a little different insofar as style and character, they all shared the same concept and didn't deviate from what the symbol consisted of. The NF insignia or symbol is a sombrero that has a dagger piercing through it. There's 3 drops of blood dripping off the tip of the dagger, and each drop characterizes its own individual meaning. Attached to the sombrero, there's also going to be a braided rope or a drawstring that characterizes an unbreakable chain of unified NF members. The sombrero obviously represents the Raza heritage, and the dagger represents that this is a violent organization. It's also a representation of the NF's weapon of choice, a stabbing instrument. As I've alluded to in the past, tomahawks or slicing weapons are the NR's signature weapons. They like tomahawks. But if an NF member is in the county jail or sometimes even in the pinta and he orders a removal to be carried out, 9 times out of 10, he's going to mandate that a pedazo is used, as this is the NF's way of doing business. The NF has always preferred bone crushers or stabbing instruments over any other type of weapon, so this is a representation of that as well. It's also a message to the NF's opposition and all those who bear witness to the NF symbol that this is a violent organization and an organization to be reckoned with. The 3 drops of blood dripping off the tip of the dagger all have individual meanings. The first drop is for all those NF members who have spilled their blood and who have honorably given their life in the course of protecting and defending the organization. The second drop of blood is for all those who have turned coward, traitor, or deserter. And the third drop of blood is for the NF's opposition, all those who oppose the NF and the NF's existence. That's a breakdown of the NF insignia. The NR insignia, which I've included a picture of, is an eagle holding a dagger in its beak. It's holding a sombrero in its right talon and a book with a red rag draped over it in its left talon. There's a caption in the book that's basically a metaphor attributed to the NR's security. The sombrero and the dagger are symbols that are a direct association to the NF and a tribute to its allegiance to the NF. And of course, the red rag that's draped over the book is a reflection of its association to the movement. So Book Nasty 707 wants to know why you think the Familia never established way up north like Humboldt County, like from Pelican Bay and Del Norte County to southern Humboldt. Seems like a missed opportunity to an open market. Yeah, they're out there. It's just not on a big scale. It's widely known that there's a lot of money out there in some of these areas like Humboldt County, South Humboldt County, and in Del Norte County. But if you're not from those small rural counties or you don't have people out there, it's kind of hard to just go out there and tap into those markets. I can tell you from my own experiences myself that it's not as easy as just moving out there and setting up shop. Those small tight-knit communities know everything that's going on in their backyard, and if you're not a native of that area, you're gonna have a hard time. People make it their business to know your business, and they want to know what you're doing out there. When parole sent me out to Ukiah in Mendocino County, I stood out like a sore thumb. People wanted to know who I was and what my business was for being out there. I'm serious. That entire community knew I was out there within a few days of me landing out there. And the only reason why I was able to eventually settle in is because they found out that parole had moved me out there. So I know how hard it can be. Mendocino County, Ukiah, Willits, and Hopland were just a few of the small towns I was trying to establish when parole sent me out there. Doing it myself and building over time eventually paid off. But I just can't see a whole regiment of 20 or 30 members moving in out there and trying to do it like we have in other Northern California cities. You'd literally be on borrowed time, and it would be difficult trying to navigate through some of the obstacles that you'd encounter. Law enforcement is another hurdle that you're going to have to contend with as well. Anyone can move out there, you have that right, but they're still going to be on your bumper if they think you're up to no good out there. So in short order, it's not that the NF is overlooking these counties and passing up the opportunity. It's just not as easy as just going out there and tapping in. One of the smarter ways that it's been effectuated is to tap into some of the resources by establishing contacts and connections out there. That's what we were doing. Those counties supplied a lot of good Yeska at dirt cheap prices, so we used to drive out there, make our regular runs, and tap in that way. So Ambitious 530 wants to know, I've heard you speak on the Constitution a lot and how you would read it religiously. Is there anything out of the NF Bible you still live by, practice today? I would think there's probably a lot of things that I unconsciously still continue to live by. When you live one way for so many years and you conduct yourself according to the principles and belief system that you believed in, then I think it's safe to assume that there's still some residual effects and there's still some things that will always be ingrained within me. In retrospect, I can't say that everything I learned from or through the NF was all bad. Self-education, self-betterment, some of the things that pertain to conduct and discipline are all things that I still practice today. Other things like how my personal perspectives and thinking patterns were shaped, being professional at whatever I apply myself to, and just some of the other things like showing due diligence, respect towards others, and just how I carry myself are all things that I learned and embraced from that lifestyle. So Greatest Ever wants to know, in which year did the NF decide to adopt the Welga bird as one of its symbols? Who made that decision? Where was that decision made? Why was that symbol adopted? I was once told the Welga bird was adopted by Brown Bob while housed in San Quentin in 1977. There's some truth to that. It was actually adopted to be used as a symbol of the NR, not the NF. As Brown Bob was one of the three creators and architects of the Nuestra Raza, along with Copas and Corny, he was one of the ones who came up with the idea of adopting the Welga bird as one of the NR's insignias. The reason why they adopted and embraced the Welga bird as one of the NR symbols is because of what the Welga bird and the whole Cesar Chavez movement represented. His movement was founded on bettering the working conditions for the manual laborers and the farm workers. He was all about fighting for the raza and enshrining some of the changes that would better the raza in the California Constitution. So MR 415 wants to know, did you think at any time of the NF's existence could it have ever reached the level of other criminal organizations like the Italian Mafia? If so, why and where could it have been done? And if not, why couldn't it? I think the NF has failed to reach its full potential due to its own indiscretions and due to the NF's leadership making choices that hindered its own progress. I've answered a similar question like this before, where someone asked if I thought the NF would ever reach the potential that the Italian Mafia had reached. No, I don't. But not because the NF lacks the resources or the ability to do it. The reason I don't think it'll be done is because this is a different time and a different era. The advancement of law enforcement technology in the 21st century is nothing like it was in the 70s and 80s, when the Italian Mafia was at the top of its game. In fact, I believe that if you took the Italian Mafia from the 70s and 80s and let them run all the same crime rackets and illegal activities that they ran back then today, I don't think they'd survive 6 months. Law enforcement is just too advanced. The other side of it is that people feared the Italian Mafia back in those days, and there was a deep-seated fear about cooperating against them or fingering them for crimes they committed. Nowadays, people don't even think twice about assisting law enforcement when it comes to targeting these criminal organizations. So Mike Hoxlawn wants to know, what do you think is the next Salinas San Jose stronghold for Norteños outside of California? Mike, I couldn't even tell you, Mike. There's a lot of different states outside of California that have the potential to turn into these types of strongholds or NF power bases though. Utah, Washington, Kansas City, Colorado, and Arizona are just a few to name. Following Operation Black Widow, and after the majority of the NF's top leadership was commuted to the federal prison system, the NF branch went on an all-out recruitment blitz. This not only allowed the NF to build on its influence, but it also allowed it to bolster its manpower in some of these states that it had established active regiments in. I can't say for sure which of these states has a bigger base or which one has the most influence, but I do know that Utah and Washington are among the front runners. So Raymond Colazo wants to know, so if the old leadership asked you to come back in the mix and you could go back to your old position, would you go back? Oh man. That's a difficult question to answer, but I'm going to be brutally honest and keep it real. I want to say the more rational, wiser part of me would say no, because of what I've been through, what I know, and what I've learned during the 20 plus years that I was involved in that lifestyle. Saying that I'd want to go back to being a part of that lifestyle would in essence be saying that I would want to go back to spending more of my life in prison, that I want to jump right back into the political jostling, and that I'd be willing to go back and participate in that violence and treachery that lifestyle perpetuates. I would also have to be willing to reprioritize my loyalties by putting the organization first above my biological family again, my kids, and all those who I turned my back on once before. Even though I chose to commit myself to the NF back in the 90s, I still have family, including my kids, who still hold deep resentments towards me for turning my back on them like I did before. These relationships are still being mended right now, but in order to return back to the fold would undoubtedly require me to turn my back on them again. So when I look at it from a clear, unobstructed perspective without all the smoke screens or the blinders, I'd have to say no. I wouldn't take my old position back, and no, I wouldn't want to be part of it again. But like I said, this is the rational answer, the intelligent answer, speaking from my brain. If I was going to be completely honest about it and give you my other truth, an answer that comes from my heart, I'd tell you something different. Don't fault me for being brutally honest and for not trying to sugarcoat or pretty up the things that are still in my heart. Some of you may not understand it. It might seem contradictory to some of you. I'm sure others will even think that I failed to learn some valuable lessons. That's okay, and I understand this. But at the end of the day, for me, it's not about answering these questions to appease people or to twist up my truths in an effort to win over approval. It's not about that. I've got to stay true to myself and be honest about it, whether people like it, understand it, approve of it, or dismiss it. So speaking from the heart, I'm conflicted. Despite the fact that I was exposed to a level of betrayal and cutthroat politics by some of my own supposed brothers in crime, there's still a part of me that hasn't completely let go of those ties I once had. It's not as easy as just turning it off. I'll be honest, when I went through my struggles that landed me in bad standings, having to come to terms with the fact that I was going to be categorized as a dropout, that I was going to be ostracized, and that I was no longer going to be part of the familia, this was beyond any words that I can accurately and fully articulate. I went through a period of deep depression, self-disappointment, and I just had a hard time embracing that transition. Truth be told, I never did fully embrace it. I was full of regrets. I had a lot of resentment, and I was locked into a perpetual state of serious denial for a long time. How did I fucking get myself crossed up like this? How did I allow this shit to happen? And how could I have been so careless? Were just some of the questions I continued to ask myself. For a long time, this shit even came to me in my dreams. That's how bad it affected me. I wished I could change it. Some of it was positive and some of it was negative. The haters can laugh. I don't really care, man. But I'm telling you guys this because this is how deep it affected me. Let's just keep it real. to a lot of you who fell into bad standings like myself, no matter how stupid, no matter how consequential, no matter how much of a relegation it is, if you're being true to yourself, there's a part of you that wants to be back in good standings. To be able to be amongst the fellas, knowing that you've maintained your loyalty and integrity as a stand-up dude. Even in the most egregious of circumstances, where you were done foul, where you felt betrayal at its worst conceivable level, you can't deny the fact that any man wants to be looked at with the highest degree of respect, that he wants to be held in high regard, and where he wants to be remembered as an honorable dude. Yes, a part of me wishes I could still be a part of that lifestyle. Yes, a part of me wishes I could slide back and pick up where I left off without having fucked up the way I did. I invested a lot of years into that lifestyle. I made a lot of sacrifices. I lost a lot of things as a direct result of those choices. Even though there's a lot of negativity that comes with it, prison, violence, politics, etc., those are all the things that I had accepted once before and would accept again. The carnalismo, the camaraderie, and all those things were things I valued and sometimes miss. But in closing this up, as I said, this isn't the rational side of me. This isn't the intelligent side, and I know this. These are the things I feel in my heart, and some of these things are built on false senses of pride, false senses of belief. Will I go back? No. Will I be a part of that life again? No. Will the NF give me a second chance? Hell no. It is what it is. Realistically, the NF has all but bolted the doors, and my sense of trust in honoring those who remain a part of that lifestyle has been shaken to the core. So although some of my answers about this particular question might seem ignorant, aimless, and without purpose, you can't fault me for being honest. As I said, these are the residuals of once being a true believer, and not even I can change what it left in my heart. Truth be told, I'm in a better place now, and I know it. I don't have to worry about political maneuvering, looking over my shoulder, or plotting on the next target I have to stab. Everything in life happens for a reason, and I'm smart enough to know that even though the alter ego boxer would go back, that's not my purpose anymore. So Charlie Lokes wants to know, how do you feel about homies not doing prison time? What I mean is you guys, OGs, look down on homies who don't do prison time. Can you speak on what was the biggest difference on what was Sureños and Norteños schooling? You know what I mean? Kind of, sort of. Personally, I think anyone who looks down on another homie as if he's somehow inferior because he didn't go to prison is a damn fool. Those who think that going to prison is some type of notable accomplishment and that they've achieved some type of grandeur feat by making it there are brainless idiots. I guess there really is this perception amongst this younger generation that by going to prison and by having the ability to say that you've been there, that you've now attained prison credibility, and that you've now completed the final phase that gives you G status is cool. This is a sad, fragmented, and flawed way of thinking. Since when does it become cool to go to the joint? To embrace it as an accomplishment because of the status and recognition it gives you amongst your peers. This is a clear indication of how this mindset and the mentality that is fostered by young aspiring gang members has infected and poisoned their minds. I would imagine that anyone who loves and cares about their kids doesn't want them to be a part of anything that influences them into believing that going to prison is cool. I'm sure most of you agree that this isn't what you want for your kids. It's perplexing to hear that prison has now become the new university for the aspiring college kid, and that this is what some of the younger generation is now striving for. But as perplexing as this may be to hear, it's true. Their minds are being led to believe that they've somehow fallen short, that they haven't been completely gamed up, and that they're substandard with regard to status and credibility if they haven't touched down behind the walls of a prison. So as far as me personally, Charlie Lokes, I've always looked at the homeboys who don't go to prison as the smart ones. I don't think there's nothing cool about going to prison at all. In fact, I think most guys that ended up going to prison are the dumb ones. We were the ones who were too stupid to figure out that prison was nothing more than an anonymous gateway to self-destruction. It was part of the process that would provide you with all the mechanisms, the ideas, and the tools needed in order to begin going down that path of failure. Some of us made this choice freely because we thought it was cool, and it was just part of what we thought we were supposed to do as young gang members. Others, outside the typical gang member, were unfortunately thrust into the system because of choices they had to make in order to survive. Coming from impoverished backgrounds, you either went without and sunk deeper into poverty, or you did what you had to do in order to survive. I can honestly say that I personally never thought it was cool to go to prison, or that I never made going to prison a goal of mine. For me, it was in part because of the lifestyle I was living, and because I just refused to continue seeing my family live subpar the way we were. So Federico Rodriguez wants to know, could you elaborate on what happened on the Green Wall documentary when the riot popped off in Folsom, and if you knew information about it? In regards to that particular riot that you're asking about, this is what I know about it. In January 2002, an incident kicked off between the Northerners and the Southerners. Whether it was over disrespect, an incident that just escalated, or these two groups were just vying for control of the yard, the Northerners assaulted the Southerners and kicked off the first riot. From January until April of 2002, the Northerners and the Southerners were slammed down and the tension was still escalating. I believe sometime in late March or early April, right before the second riot kicked off, the administration had found 20 perazos that they attributed to belonging to both the Northerners and the Southerners. So they knew there was still tension out there, and there were even rumors that the Southerners were hard-pressed to retaliate. At the time, the associate warden for Folsom State Prison was a guy named Michael Burnell. Burnell was said to have created his own green wall in Folsom. For those of you that aren't familiar with what a green wall is, it's basically a prison administration who sticks together and who operates under its own code of silence, impeding any and all criminal or watchdog investigations that it might come under. Oftentimes, these administrations will be involved in a number of corruptive activities, everything from inmate beatings, fabricating paperwork, cover-ups, breaking CDCR policy, etc., etc. A green wall is sworn in secrecy to protect and shroud the acts of corruption that it's involved in, and all those officers that don't honor this code of silence will be ostracized and turned on by the rest of the administration. The name Green Wall is derived from, first, the fact that the uniforms that all CDCR officials wear is green. From a low-level correctional officer all the way up to the rank of a lieutenant, a captain, to the associate warden, the uniforms are green, from the bottom to the top. The term wall is a reference to the unbreakable chain of unified correctional officers and officials who will collectively foil and impede any investigation or inquiry into their corruptive activities. Along with the associate warden, Michael Burnell, two other high-ranking officials that were a part of his Green Wall administration were Captain Oliver Acuna and Lieutenant Alan Baber. Despite the fact that this administration was corrupt, there were other high-ranking CDCR officials working at Folsom that weren't on board with some of the things that Burnell and his cronies were orchestrating. One of those things in particular was the second riot that kicked off on April 8, 2002. A lot of other high-ranking officials at Folsom felt it was a premature decision to let the Northerners and Southerners off lockdown due to all the weapons and due to the information that they had gathered. Burnell knew this, but still decided to orchestrate his plan by opening up the yard that day anyway. The other thing that Burnell made no secret about was his feelings directed at Northerners. He didn't like them, and he was clearly beholden to the Southerners. So the initial plan that he proposed but later broke was to let the Northerners out that day first, and then to let small groups of Southerners out of each building one at a time. In essence, this would have kept any ensuing incidents that might have kicked off small and manageable, instead of letting all the inmates out together at the same time and allowing it to involve a larger number of inmates, which would have made it a lot more dangerous. All this changed. Burnell had his facility captain, Oliver Acuna, make the determination to release all the Northerners first, then release all the Southerners immediately after. This undermined the strategy management had in place to keep the incident small. The second part of Burnell's plan to orchestrate the riot was by refusing to allow Correctional Captain Dub Piper to put the yard down once it became obvious that the two groups were about to engage in a riot. Once the investigation was later conducted and all the videotapes were synchronized, you could hear Captain Doug Piper asking Burnell if he was going to put the yard down. Burnell's answer was no, not yet. This incident resulted in the termination of Benel, as well as Benel, Captain Oliver Acuna, and Lieutenant Alan Baber all being named in the civil suit. The suit was filed by Correctional Officer Pat Odia, who received a spinal injury due to the riot. The other correctional captain, Doug Piper, that tried to stop the riot, committed suicide as a result of being overwhelmed with guilt for not doing more than he did to stop it. That's what I know about that situation right there. So DP650 wants to know, did you know Fidel De La Riva? He came out on a documentary. Yeah, I know Fidel De La Riva, aka Boxer from Selma. I was housed with him in Pelican Bay SHU C11 back in 1997-1998. At the time, he was celled up with Luis Lucho Montalvo from Hayward. I was celled up in the same pod with Antonio Baby Joker Solis from Salinas. Also present with us was Armando Big Spider Flores from Lodi and his cellie Richard Spider Goldie from Stockton. We were all in that same pod together for about 2 years before they moved all of us to C2. Boxer ended up going to C5 to cell up with another brother, but this was the last time I seen him. He was a good dude who was becoming more involved with the NF's leadership, but I guess something discouraged him and he just got tired of being part of the O, because out of nowhere he locked it up. He wasn't under investigation, he didn't do nothing wrong, and there was no reason for him to be worried about his standings. The picture above shows Boxer standing in the middle after his defection. I hope you guys have enjoyed this Q&A. I still have questions left over that some of you submitted, so I'm going to start working on another one this week. Those of you who have more questions, start submitting them now so they can make it in on this next one. By now, you guys may have already heard about this, but the reason why our content was so limited this week is because we got dinged by YouTube. They wouldn't allow us to upload any content for a whole week, so we had a minor setback. YouTube's on a good one right now, and they seem to be flagging everything, so you guys should be getting all the content that we had to sit on for a week. Anyways, as always, we just want to continue extending our appreciation to you all for all the support you've been showing us here at Paradigm Media News. We're going to continue to keep doing what we have by staying positive, by staying true to ourselves, and by staying out of all the YouTube drama. We read all your comments, and trust me, we appreciate the fact that some of you recognize this. Chameleons can only change their colors so many times. Sooner or later, you'll begin seeing them in their true colors for what they are. Some of us are smart enough to know this. If you haven't subscribed to our other channel, do it now. It's important that you do in case this channel ever goes down. Paradigm Entertainment Productions.